Nothing announces conflict on the savanna. There is no warning signal, no clear beginning. Instead, tension builds quietly through distance, closing movement, slowing, and attention sharpening. A feeding ground becomes crowded. Scavenger birds circle lower than usual. Sounds carry farther in the cooling air. For predators, these details matter. They are signals that space is tightening and options are narrowing. At the top of the food chain, control is not maintained by force alone. It is maintained by timing, positioning, and the ability to respond before situations escalate. When any of these elements falter, dominance becomes exposed. Tonight, multiple strategies are about to collide. One relies on physical authority and established presence. The other depends on coordination assessment and calculated risk. Neither side is searching for a fight. Both are preparing for the possibility that retreat may no longer be viable. This is how most serious confrontations begin in the wild. Not with aggression, but with hesitation. With animals measuring one another in silence, deciding whether the cost of engagement outweighs the cost of withdrawal. Once that calculation tips in the wrong direction, control starts to unravel. And when it does, events move quickly. The African savanna operates under constant constraint. Water sources are limited. Prey populations shift unpredictably. Seasonal change compresses movement into narrower corridors, forcing predators to operate closer to one another than they would choose. This landscape does not encourage isolation. It creates overlap. As grazing animals follow shrinking resources, predators follow them in turn. Hunting routes intersect. Resting areas lose their separation. What once functioned as neutral space becomes contested ground. In this environment, competition is not driven by hostility. It is driven by necessity. Predators must secure enough food not only to survive, but to recover. Recovery determines future success. Without it, strength declines. Reaction time slows and injury becomes more likely. This pressure reshapes behavior. Movements become cautious. Engagements are delayed. Decisions are constantly reassessed. A predator that advances too aggressively risks damage. One that withdraws too often risks starvation. The savanna, therefore, becomes a system of forced choices. Territory in this context is not a fixed boundary. It is a shifting zone of influence that expands or contracts based on confidence numbers and recent outcomes. Control today may vanish tomorrow if conditions change. Another factor complicates this balanced time of day. As daylight fades, visibility decreases and uncertainty rises. Sound replaces sight as the primary source of information. Communication becomes critical and misinterpretation grows more likely. This is when pressure intensifies. Predators that function well under uncertainty gain an advantage. Those dependent on clear lines and coordinated positioning must work harder to maintain control. When multiple high-level predators depend on the same system to function, friction becomes unavoidable, not because of rivalry, but because delay itself becomes dangerous. At some point, maintaining distance costs more than closing it, and once predators are forced into proximity, the savanna begins testing which strategies hold under strain and which begin to fail. Lions operate from a position that appears secure, but security comes with constraints. Their size, strength, and social structure allow them to control space effectively. Yet these same traits reduce flexibility. Every decision a pride makes carries weight because reversing course is costly. Lions depend on coordination. Successful movement requires alignment between multiple individuals, each responding at the right moment. When this coordination weakens, even briefly, the system slows down. Food requirements amplify the problem. Large bodies demand substantial intake. Missed hunts are not minor setbacks. They accumulate quickly. As pressure increases, tolerance for disruption decreases. Territory management becomes central. Lions rely on familiarity, known terrain, predictable prey movement, and established resting zones. These advantages disappear when control is challenged repeatedly. Constant disturbance forces lions to react rather than plan. This is where exposure begins. Protecting young further narrows options. Cubs restrict mobility and demand constant attention. A pride cannot simply disengage from threats without risking loss. Defensive behavior becomes reactive, drawing energy away from hunting and recovery. Male lions face additional limitations. Their presence deters rivals, but it also commits them to confrontation. Withdrawal weakens authority. Engagement risks injury. Either choice carries consequence. As pressure mounts, response windows shorten. Lions must decide quickly whether to assert control or conserve strength. Hesitation creates openings. Overcommitment drains reserves. Strength in this context becomes a liability. Unlike more flexible predators, lions cannot easily shift tactics. Their advantage depends on maintaining a stable environment. When that stability erodes, the system strains. Signals that once commanded distance lose effectiveness. Displays require follow-through. Each challenge tests credibility. What appears from a distance as dominance is in practice constant management of risk. A pride that fails to manage this balance does not collapse. Suddenly it degrades incrementally. Small losses accumulate. Energy deficits deepen. Reaction time slows. By the time weakness becomes visible, options are already limited. Hyenas approach conflict differently. They do not rely on overwhelming force or fixed control. Instead, their advantage lies in adaptability, communication, and the ability to apply sustained pressure without immediate exposure. Clan structure enables this approach. Each individual operates as part of a larger system, responding to cues rather than commands. This decentralization allows rapid adjustment when conditions shift. Hyenas assess before acting. They observe movement patterns, note response times, and identify which individuals are committed to defense and which are not. Engagement is delayed until enough information is gathered. Numbers are used strategically, not recklessly. Hyenas rarely advance as a single unit. They spread out, occupying space and forcing opponents to divide attention. This creates uncertainty and stretches defensive reactions. Pressure replaces confrontation. Vocal signals coordinate movement and reinforce presence. These calls are not expressions of chaos, but tools of control, guiding positioning, timing, and escalation. Even without direct contact, influence is exerted. Hyenas also exploit endurance. They are capable of extended activity without immediate payoff. Waiting does not weaken their position. It often strengthens it. This patience allows them to operate during moments others avoid: late hours, unstable conditions, periods of fatigue. Under these circumstances, rigid systems begin to fail. Unlike predators tied to specific territories, hyenas remain mobile. If resistance increases, pressure shifts. If opportunity appears elsewhere, focus changes immediately. This flexibility limits risk. Raising young within a clan reinforces collective behavior. Cubs learn response patterns early, developing awareness of group dynamics rather than individual dominance. Survival becomes shared responsibility. Hyenas do not seek decisive victories. They seek favorable outcomes. Access rather than control. Disruption rather than confrontation. By avoiding full commitment, they reduce the cost of failure. Losses remain manageable. Injuries are minimized. Pressure can be reapplied repeatedly. Over time, this approach alters the environment itself. Opponents expend energy responding. Attention fragments. Stability erodes. What emerges is not dominance in the traditional sense, but leverage, the ability to influence outcomes without direct engagement. And in contested systems, leverage often outlasts strength. Power rarely changes hands through a single decisive moment. More often, it shifts gradually through fatigue, distraction, and repeated small concessions that go unnoticed until reversal is impossible. In contested ecosystems, dominance is not declared, it is tested. Each interaction leaves a trace, a delayed response, A retreat that lasts slightly longer than before, a signal that is answered with less urgency. These are not failures in isolation, they are indicators. Lions feel this pressure first in their routines. Hunting schedules tighten, rest periods shorten. Movement becomes less efficient as vigilance increases. The pride spends more time watching and less time recovering. Hyenas do not force confrontation. They let imbalance grow. By appearing withdrawing and reappearing at unpredictable intervals, they disrupt rhythm. Predictability, once a strength for coordinated hunters, becomes a vulnerability. Every false alarm costs energy. Over time, lions begin to respond defensively, even when no direct threat exists. Muscles tense, attention divides, focus fragments. This constant readiness is expensive. Meanwhile, hyenas refine their assessment. They learn which lions charge and which hesitate, which defend aggressively and which conserve strength. Patterns emerge. Pressure becomes targeted. Hyenas position themselves where reaction is slowest. They linger near routes of retreat, not attack. They vocalize just enough to trigger response, then wait. Each encounter shifts cost onto the opponent. The environment itself begins to favor adaptability. Rigid systems struggle under fluctuating conditions. Flexible ones thrive. For lions, this means choices narrow further. Confrontation risks injury. Ignoring threats risks loss. Neither option restores balance. What appears externally as a stalemate is internally a redistribution of energy. One side bleeds slowly, the other invests minimally. And in systems governed by survival efficiency decides outcomes. By the time power visibly changes, it is already shifted. Hyenas do not break dominance by force, they dissolve it. Instead of challenging the strongest point, they test the edges, moments of transition, distraction, and fatigue where resistance is weakest. Lines fail at their margins. Hyenas exploit this by attacking logistics rather than authority. They contest access to food, disrupt recovery, and insert uncertainty into spaces once considered secure. Carcasses become negotiation zones. A single hyena rarely commits alone. It probes, measures distance, withdraws, then returns with reinforcement only if conditions favor escalation. This layered engagement limits exposure while maximizing pressure. Lions respond as expected with assertion. Charges are launched, displays intensify, boundaries are reinforced. But every assertion demands follow-through. Each response consumes strength without guaranteeing resolution. Hyenas count on this imbalance. They allow lions to win moments that still cost them energy. A chased hyena loses nothing. A charging lion expends force. The exchange favors endurance. As nights pass, reaction speed slows. Coordination frays. Individual lions begin acting independently, reducing the effectiveness of group response. This fragmentation is critical. Once unity weakens, dominance becomes symbolic rather than functional. Displays still occur, but enforcement lags. Hyenas recognize this immediately. Pressure increases not through aggression, but proximity. They move closer, stay longer, force repeated decisions. At this stage, the conflict is no longer about strength. It is about tolerance. Which system can endure inefficiency longer? Hyenas built for sustained engagement and rapid recovery gain advantage without ever needing decisive action. The line does not break loudly. It fades. There comes a moment when control costs more than it returns. This moment is rarely dramatic. No final charge, no clear defeat. Just a recalculation. For lions, defending every challenge becomes unsustainable. Energy reserves thin. Recovery slows. Injury risk rises. The environment no longer supports full commitment. At this stage, dominance transforms into liability. Lions begin to disengage selectively. Not retreat, but prioritization. Certain areas are abandoned. Some confrontations ignored. Control contracts. Hyenas notice immediately. What was once contested becomes accessible. Not seized aggressively, but occupied casually. Presence replaces challenge. This is the final shift. The ecosystem adjusts to the new balance. Movement patterns change. Resource access redistributes. The former dominant force still exists, but its influence no longer defines the system. Hyenas do not celebrate victory. They simply continue operating. Their success lies not in overthrowing strength, but in outlasting its usefulness. By forcing opponents to defend more than they can afford, they reshape the environment itself. In nature, survival does not reward power alone. It rewards systems that adapt, conserve, and apply pressure without breaking. Strength wins battles. Endurance wins landscapes. And in the long run, control belongs not to the strongest, but to the most efficient.